So we'll finish up what we started last week, and then we can talk about all of it. The hermeneutics, the studying part, the preparing the lesson, the presenting of the lesson, and so on and so forth. So last week we went through the presenting. We talked about memory, helping you remember, helping the class remember, the delivery, listening with the 3 years of the listening to the audience, listening to what you studied, and listening to the Holy Spirit. Then we just talked about in the presentation using varied speech, eye contact, body movements, and there was something from body movements that I forgot to tell you guys last week, and I'm not remembering this week, so I'll hopefully remember it later. And then we talked about the oral flags, and then we got into reading the room, but realized we didn't have much time, so I kind of want to start there. We talked through the preaching monologue part pretty well, so I don't think we rushed at that point. But when you get into a small group, the same as above, meaning when you're doing a small group and leading one, you don't react to distractions unless the audience significantly is distracted themselves. So if you're leading a small group and 2 people turn and comment to each other, unless it's starting to distract everybody else, my recommendation is just let that go, because a lot of times the comment they're making is a way that they're actually engaged in listening, because they're making a comment about something they just heard, and so on and so forth. Now, if they're turning and talking to each other and not even part of the discussion, then that's a different thing. And if it's consistent enough that it's distracting people, and you see every once in a while you'll get somebody who gets uptight for you. As a teacher, you don't mind what they're doing, but they think it's really rude. And so sometimes you'll want to, squelch that so that other person can be able to pay attention. The other thing, react to distractions with a thoughtful and lighthearted humor. The caution that I said last week is a strong caution, because different people have different ideas of humor and commenting. So like you can comment in a way that you think is funny, but you come from the family where sarcasm and negative comments are funny, and then someone comes from a family where sarcasm and negative comments are just mean. And so you have to be careful with that. I grew up in the former, where sarcasm and negative comments are funny and show part of the relationship and stuff like that. And so I found in teaching I had to be careful, because sometimes I would be like, wow, you're really paying attention, aren't you? Like, ha, 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 and then they feel terrible, and they think you're mean, and so you just have to, and you'll notice, if you haven't yet, listen to yourself teach, or listen to find some way that you can listen to yourself, and see when you give the offhand comments, do you by nature go negative, or do you by nature go positive? And you want to catch that and be aware of it, and know which one you are. And if you are the one on the negative, you have to be more careful depending on who you're talking to. What's a negative about always responding positive? If you're with somebody and every way that they react to everything is just positive, and it's this nice thing that they're saying.
And they don't understand that it's a problem.
Okay, they don't understand that it's a problem, and it starts to get disingenuous. Because you know that people are frustrated by this stuff, and they're this, and it's like it can be disingenuous. So it's just kind of learning a balance of how that's effective with different people.
Dwayne, I was at a conference or a concert one time, and a Christian artist named Steve Camp was the performer at the concert, and he's got very deep lyrics, and he's and he was giving a lot, he traditionally very challenging guy, and he made a comment about the lights, and he said, let's not mess with the lights, or don't mess with the lights, and don't let the Spirit lead you to do that again. And I think he was just in the camp that you were talking about, just being a little humorous. But everybody in the crowd said, this guy's a jerk. And his effect on the crowd just went.
Yep. Yeah, and that's why you have to be careful with that humor.
Yep.
So the second one, noticing and responding to different personalities. So the first one, the second, teacher personality. Rod, oh, nothing. But you just walked right into that.
She was talking about the
I
lesson.
was asking if there was a crowd of Reformed kids.
Yes,
That
it was.
the only time he was.
So second teacher personality. This is so if you're in a small group and you are sharing, and somebody comes, enters into the conversation, and it's not a question. It's adding, and you did walk right into this one, Ron. So so it's like that. You're adding as well. Now, a second teacher personality that does that is not bad. And so like what Rod just did isn't wrong. Now, there's a couple of things to be aware of. Is one, does the information being said stay in line with the lesson? If it stays in line with the lesson, it stays in line with what you're doing. There's ways that you can take what was said and feed off into your next point. Okay, you would think. I think I started to say this last week. You would think that you try to shut down the second teacher personality, and I would say you don't try to shut down the second teacher personality. Again, as you get into a small group, you're talking about a group that's going to meet more than once, typically. And so when you have somebody who is a second teacher personality, I usually sit down with them and I say, hey, I like the stuff that you add to the lesson. And it helps to say that if I've reacted positively in the lesson to what they've said, instead of getting frustrated that they're saying this and I'm wanting to say this. But then I also sit down with them and I say, as you have that inclination to give input, every third time you feel that, do it, but the other times don't. Because other people, what second teacher personalities don't realize is that when people go to a class or a Bible study, their expectation is to hear from the person who officially is the teacher. And if the person who is not officially the teacher starts taking up a good amount of time, whatever that second teacher personality says is lost. And then it detracts from the whole lesson. And so, because there's just this expectation of this person's the teacher, this is the one who I came to hear in the class, and so you have to be careful of that, and that's where sometimes when I've been in different studies, we'll go through a lesson, and these are studies I've been at here. We'll go through a lesson, and when we're done with the lesson, we say, "Are there any questions?" You get 3 more lessons, because people pipe in and start saying the same thing that was in the lesson, but the way they might have said it, and it becomes a thing where it can be positive. But if it goes on for a long time, and then there's 3, and then 4, and then 5 that do that, it detracts from the lesson, and it detracts from the main point. And often, what happens is you have a time where we're going to break up into groups and discuss, and then that doesn't happen because the second teacher personality did that. The best way to handle the second teacher personality then in all of that is outside of the class. Don't deal with it inside the class. Deal with it outside of the class. If once every 3 times isn't enough, if it's a slightly different situation, then you sit down and you talk with them, and you just talk through the dynamic of the class. But you don't want to shut it out completely, because a lot of times they bring a lot of wisdom to what's being said. Now, the more of a group discussion it is, the more that this is good, the less of a group discussion it is, the less this is positive. So the next one is the talkative personality. So this is distinct from the second teacher personality, in that the talkative personality is either talking to other people in the group, not participating in the full discussion, or when they participate in the full discussion, they're not trying to teach anything. They're not adding their 2 cents. They're just talking. And sometimes they're constantly raising their hands and different things like this. Again, with this type of personality, you deal with it outside of the lesson. If you start doing it within the lesson, you're going to run the danger of what Rod just said happened with the artist, because he said he dealt with it in a way that was negative enough that some felt it was very rude, and then you lose them. And so it's very hard to deal with that. Now, when you have somebody who is talking and they're going, you do have to interrupt them. But there's ways to interrupt them where you don't start with an interruption. Okay? One of the key things I feel that's helpful, and it's a small thing, but instead of starting with a but type of beginning, it's like, yes, but let's get to the yes, but that immediately tells them their input was contrary to where you're going. So if you can just keep in your mind and go, yes. And as we look back at our lesson, you use that and type of concept to come back into the lesson. It's a slight change of words, gets you back into the lesson, but people don't have that discomfort and shame that they were taking the class the wrong way. Others don't feel that you were being mean to them, but you just step in and do that. And sometimes what you have to do is you're listening for them to finish a sentence. If you say something mid-sentence and you're interrupting them, then that's also clear to everybody that they're, you're not in favor of what they are saying. You wait for them to finish a thought, and then you blend that thought into where you're going to go. But you've got to step in and you got to do it. Sometimes you sit there and you say, I feel like I'm being rude if I do that. We're being rude to the people who came to the class by not doing it. So you have to make sure that if someone's just talking, it has nothing to do with the lesson at all, that you have that courage to step in, interrupt, and just move forward. But you do so with that positive yes and type of tone. The it's all about me personality. It's all about me personality. What do you guys think this would be? Can you describe what you think and how this is different than just the talkative or the second teacher personality?
Can I talk?
Yeah.
Is this an appropriate
This
time?
is appropriate time to talk.
Everybody's gun shy now.
Yeah.
No, I myself, this is an example that I am going to tell you what I myself find I have to be careful not to say, in my life, God has shown me. In my life, this is what I've gone through. In my life, this is what I've gone through. And everything becomes about how God's working in my life versus what God is saying in the scripture.
Okay. Now, are you talking about as the teacher or as somebody sitting in the Bible study?
Either way, as
Okay.
a teacher, I'm pretty much the same as a student or as a teacher.
Yeah.
But I think I have to guard myself from
Right.
that. I don't
Now-
know if that's what you're talking about.
Somewhat. As a teacher, just because you bring up a good point, when you're using personal examples, if you are always saying, in my life, then people can feel like sometimes people will think, wow, they're bragging because they're talking about a time that God really blessed, but then you share in your life about things in your life that's negative too. So, you do both. But if too much of it is from my life directly, then some people will wrestle with it one way or the other. They'll kind of judge how much you're doing it. So the way around that is that when you have an example from your own life that fits really well, you just say, one good example would be if you were, and then you tell the example from your life as just if this happened, if you were really struggling with getting up on time to come to Sunday school class, then it's like you say if that's the case, instead of saying I struggled this morning to get up and go. It's good to have some of those, the struggles that are, you're open about your struggles, and people are able to see you wrestle with these things. But again, if you do that too much, people think it is about you. So you just give the example as though it's not you. And the same thing if you have an example and that example is from something in your past or a specific person in the past that you don't really, people would know if you named them, you can give that. You have to be careful because sometimes people still figure it out. So you do want to be careful with that, but you can do that as well. But for me, it's all about me personality. Is the person, especially when you get into a life group or a small group where you have the questions, it's like they start unloading their troubles and their problems, and when anyone else starts to unload their struggles and problems, the other person's like, well, if you think that's bad, and they keep, everything goes back.
One of them.
It's like they have to be the focus of the group. They're clearly the person in the group who has the worst life, and they're clearly the person in the group who has, and do you guys know what kind of personality I'm talking about? Okay, so again, it's all about me personality is somebody you have to talk to outside of the group, and you sit down and talk to them and say, part of the reason we're here is for caring for the other people and so on and so forth. The reason why I'm telling you these three things, even though it's not part of the presentation of the teaching, it's you have to abstain from what you want to do while you're presenting, because you want to shut this person up. You want to kind of shut them down. You want to end what they're doing. And it gets really frustrating and very distracting to you while you're presenting. And what I'm saying is you know and see the rest of the group is being affected by it. Don't get too distracted in what you're teaching. Interrupt in that nice, gentle way and get back to the lesson as much as you can. But don't end that lesson and go home and go, man, that was really frustrating. I hope that doesn't happen next week. You call that person and you set up an appointment and you talk with them and you let them know. Here's the thing, these three personalities we're talking about, they have no idea half the time how they're impacting that group. They don't know any other way to communicate. This is their nature, this is what they do. They don't know that the rest of the group is thinking what they're thinking about that person. And so you're not sitting down and saying the rest of the group is thinking this. It's like, hey, you probably don't know this, but when this behavior is occurring, sometimes it's really positive, but sometimes it gets to the point where it disrupts and you may not realize it's having this effect. And this is the other thing I always do when I'm talking to them, I assume they have no idea the impact they're having on the group. And by assuming they have no idea, it gives them that save face thing of, yeah, I didn't realize that I was doing that. And yeah, you need to work on that. And if you don't deal with these personalities in a small group, small Bible study, you will begin to see people not coming because they don't want to sit through just listening to somebody's troubles week in, week out, week in, week out, and stuff like that. The last one here, and there are more personalities than that, but these are the ones that tend to interrupt or affect your presentation and teaching the most. The quiet personality. So when you are preaching, quiet personalities doesn't matter because they're supposed to be quiet. But when you're teaching in a small group, the quiet personality can very easily just kind of get under the radar and they never answer any questions and so on and so forth. Whereas part of what you're supposed to be doing in your presentation as a teacher is drawing them in using questions. It's easy if you have a bunch of people in the group that are all very interactive to let the quiet people just sit there and not interact. And some of them will love you for it because they just don't want to interact. However, there are other times where you have to realize if you're not bringing the quiet people in, they still feel like, oh, they don't care about what I think, and such. So what is a way that you get somebody with a quiet personality involved in the discussion?
Direct questions.
Direct questions, that's right. So,
Give me a direct question to that individual.
yes, so as you're going along, you would say, let's say,
But don't forget what my spot.
yeah, well, and here's the thing, and this is what I'm saying. If I sat there and I said, so Clarence, what do you think about that? So I say the name, you do that. The problem is there are people, and this is the thing about the quiet personality, there are people that are scared to death to interact. They have no desire to interact. And the biggest thing is they're afraid of saying the wrong answer. And what always happens is you ask them the question and when they don't know the answer. And then they're stuck and it's their greatest fear. And then that shuts them down more. So I talk to a person who's quiet and I say, notice you're kind of quiet. Is that your preference? You kind of, and they say, yeah. And then if there's a fear, and I create a sign that they can do so that if I ask them a question, they can do that sign and I know they don't know the answer to that question. Okay. So like if I said, and so Clarence, what do you think about that? If Clarence went, like this, like we had arranged ahead of time that he would fold his arms and sit back and look thoughtful, I'd realize he doesn't know the answer. And so I'd say, well, wait a minute, Joe, what do you think? And I just move on to the next person. I don't even give Clarence a chance to answer. And he knows I'm not going to do that if he folds his arms. And then I try to find ways to bring them out by asking a question that's very easy to answer, and something that I feel that they're going to be capable of answering, and then I call them out, and then they always have that freedom to give that signal.
And sometimes quietly pause anyway.
Mhm.
Before the answer, you move on too quick, you're ready to speak, and then you just move on.
Right.
Because Brenda will even say that, well, that was a delayed response.
Yep.
You know?
And that's where another reason why to have like the sign, because it's like, if I ask and there's the pause, but they didn't give a sign, then I know I just need to wait for them to formulate the answer. Because there are people that think on their feet and come back right away with the answer, and there's some people that come back right away with the answer and haven't thought at all. And then there's those that need time to think. The key thing I want you guys to catch with all these is that when you're teaching, there are certain things within the audience that can discourage you, but realize those are actually discipleship goals. You're sitting down with them and helping them see how they fit into the group, helping them to fit better into the group, helping them to learn how to participate and study together with others and be aware of the impact they have on others. That's all discipleship goals, sitting down and talking with them. And a lot of times we like to go and we like to teach, but we don't like to do that stuff afterwards that helps shape people and their ability to fit in with a group. And we just have to be able to do that. So, asking questions and responding to the answers. The questions that you ask, you have to be careful what questions you ask. A lot of times we're going along and we just throw out a question because we feel the sense like this is a good time for a question, but we haven't thought through what the question is. And so we just ask what we're currently on. And so if I were like going through and I'd be like, so what date did Alexander the Great conquer the world? Well, I know the answer to that because I studied it for the lesson, but everyone else is in there going, I don't know. And it's like you got to be careful that you're not asking a question that people there aren't going to know. That's kind of a show off what you know. This is a habit that we teachers can have, where we ask a question almost knowing that almost nobody's going to know, and the fact that I can come back and answer it shows off that I do. You gotta not do that. That does not encourage the audience to participate. What you have to stop and think as you're going through. Sometimes I'll have this question coming to my mind. I'll start to ask the question. I'm like, wait, no. I'll just tell you that because I realize they're not going to know what I'm talking about. Like if I say, what's the Greek word for, like you're going to look at me like, no. So instead, what you do is you're trying to get to questions that you can ask that people will be able to give the answer to. Questions that most often are going to be easy to answer is something like, so when we look at what we've been talking about, what's a way that you might see this applying to our lives? So there's multiple answers that are there. If you have somebody that's really scared, like we talked about, of giving answers because they might be wrong, you ask them a question that isn't wrong. Like, how does it make you feel when this and such happens to you? They're just telling how they feel, and so they're able to engage and they're able to do it. So ask questions that your students can actually answer, and avoid asking the questions that you haven't taught them yet. If you haven't taught them information, don't expect them to come back with the answer. And asking a question that you know because you've already studied the information isn't fair. So always ask those answerable questions of your students. You'll get a lot more engagement. This is whenever possible, respond to a wrong answer with an additional and clarifying question. So every once in a while, if I know the group well enough and somebody offers up a wrong answer, I go, yeah, nope. I just kind of say it, and it can be fun. Okay, so it's not that if that's your personality, you can't ever do that. You do have to be careful with that. But when somebody gives a wrong answer, a lot of times what I'll say is, unpack that for me, because I'm not sure how I said, because I'm not seeing how it fits, but unpack that for me. And I'll tell you, when I do that, about half the time they unpack and I go, oh, I should have got how that fits. Why didn't I not get how it fits? It was just my brain wasn't going the same direction. And so, so by responding with a question instead of no, you eliminate those times that they were actually on task and they were saying something that was legit, but you're like, nope, and then you move on, and then you find out later, like, oh, well, maybe you were right, but you already said no, and that has an impact. So whenever you ask a question, somebody comes back with an answer, ask a clarifying question. The other thing is always assume that the reason why, if you ask a question and everyone's like not answering right, that's because you asked a bad question. So assume that burden as a teacher that you have to ask a clear question. And so if you ask a question and you realize this answer that the person gave, if they took my question in a totally different context than where I had it, yes, well then I need to clarify. I need to put my question more firmly in the context I'm talking about so that they know clearly what I'm trying to get to. And so sometimes I'll ask a question and the response comes back and I'm like, okay, yeah. And then I rephrase it and I bring it back more specifically into what I just said. And then I ask the question and the next person answers and it's a clear answer. So, but instead of going, no, you're wrong, so you just take on the burden to rephrase the question. And that way you're not, turning people away that have just tried to ask a question, and some can take a no answer. I mean, Dutchmen take no answers all the time because we still think we're right anyways. So we just...
No, we don't.
Oh. Yeah, I can see by the look on your wife's face that she agrees with me. At least about you. So when you have that chance to rephrase, to clarify it, do that. Don't say no. That was a wrong answer. So,
Dwayne, one of the things
yes.
I was gonna add to the asking questions, one of the things we don't have to do in a Bible study is, like, we don't have to formally, like, evaluate how well they're learning, right? Like we do in a school. But when you're asking questions, when you're probing and doing that sort of stuff, it's helpful, even in a Bible study setting, if I ask a question to Kyle, and Kyle, who is a bright young man, has no clue what the answer is, then I know, man, I need to probably, clarify what I've said or modify what I've taught, because there are times when you asking questions, doing Socratic lecture, can really give you some insights to what kids are getting or what students are getting or not.
Yeah. Doing the process of questions, the reason why it's important to have some form of teaching somewhere that questions are being asked is, how do you even know anyone in the church is growing? I mean, now you can, people will still come up, even if you've done more lecture style, they'll come up afterwards and say, I really have learned this and I've applied it and da-da-da. So you can see some, it's not that. But there's a lot of people who won't do that. They won't come up and talk to you, and they're not understanding it. And the way that you identify that they're not understanding is through those questions. And if somebody consistently is answering questions wrong and showing they're not understanding the scriptures at all, that's an important thing to know, because that means you may need to spend one-on-one time with this person and see where they're at in their walk with the Lord. Some of those people, you sit down and you talk to them, and you're like, so what brought you to the church? Oh, I just wanted to be a better Christian. Okay, so they don't have the Holy Spirit there helping them understand this stuff. And we have to sit down and share the gospel with them. And I have had that happen. I've had people in a group and we're talking, and they don't have any ability to understand. And so when I go out one-on-one with them and talk with them, you find out they've never even trusted in Christ. They're just there because they thought they needed to be, because time for their kids to get involved in church. Right. So we should get going back. So things like that. So the questions are important to that effect. All right, so that's a lot with the presentation. The last thing here is how to create and use PowerPoint and handouts. Okay, one of the biggest things that people tend to do in PowerPoints is put all of the content up there. So they have just the full sentences and everything, and they're kind of just reading exactly what's up there. And same thing with notes. Sometimes you can have notes where you've just written it all in. When you do that, you end up giving the handout is just kind of like another way of just talking at them, and there's not a way for them to interact with it. You'll notice that with these handouts, we have, each thing, but there's additional ways that I unpack what's said here, and I don't put all of that in here. Because I want some level of the note taker person to be able to take the notes. A note taker personality is somebody who the act of writing something out helps them to remember it. It's not just that, the note taker is going to go back and read that later all the time. It's the act of writing it out helps them remember. So giving them a handout that makes them write some of the other details that interest them and such like that, it helps them to remember them. They can go back and still read it, but it's still something that they gain from. I am not a note taker. I don't take notes ever. I went to seminary, and when I was in seminary, I didn't take notes. The most complicated class that I had, it was funny, we went to study one time, and everyone pulled out, and I had one guy pulled out 3 spiral bound notebooks and everyone else like that. I had 2 pages, and half of it was doodles to keep my attention while I was in class. I mean, I got an A in the class. It's not that, it was just I wish I was a note taker. I wish I was better at doing that, because there's other areas of life that would greatly help me, and I just can't. And when I go to take notes, the problem is I get so perfectionistic on how I'm writing the notes that I miss the rest of the class. I am an interactive learner, so when I'm in a class, I talk with the teacher, and I interact with the content and stuff like that. And I am definitely by nature a second teacher personality in a class. I have definitely learned that and had to temper it a great deal. And that's why people are like, the struggle with me being in a life group is it's hard for me to be in a life group and not lead it.
Yep.
Because even by default, people are like, oh, well, the pastor, and it's like, it's frustrating because there is an enjoyment of that, but it's hard not to do that. And so the second teacher personality is definitely, kind of who I am. But so I tend to interact. I don't take notes. If I have a handout like this, it just helps me know that the teacher's going to where the teacher said they were going to go. And that's what helps me, but I don't really use the notes a lot. So it was hard for me to learn how to develop notes because of that. So it took me years of putting notes together, asking people how is this doing, and so on and so forth. And so it's really been a process of learning. So again, don't put all the content into the handout. Have them interact with it. Earlier we talked about fill in the blank notes versus the summary outline notes like you see here. How many guys have ever done fill in the blank notes when somebody was teaching? Okay, how many of you guys liked it? Okay, when you liked it, what was it? How did it help you?
It was a tracking thing.
Mm-hmm.
It was a tracking thing. It helped me know where he's at and where he's going that way.
Yep.
And so there was a sense, so when we're learning, everybody wants to have a sense of where we're headed, have the roadmap.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's helpful. I think that's what an outline notes does too.
Yeah. And the
I think it's fun to fill in the blanks before they get there to see if I'm right.
yeah, no.
Or if somebody's doing
right there with you.
if someone's doing the alliteration thing,
Yeah.
Joel used to do that.
then you can figure out. You're like, okay, I've seen this one. Okay, what's the next
Yep.
2, and kind of figure it out and then see.
And all of that is a way that keeps you listening for something,
Mhm.
and it draws you in. The fill in the blank is more of that type of a thing. It keeps somebody engaged because they're listening for that next thing. Me, because I'm not a note taker, I just sat there and went, nah. And I just would try to listen to what they were saying, but I really wasn't caring about, and I hardly ever filled in the stuff.
So the thing I struggle with the fill in the blank is I'm not retaining things because I'm listening for the blank. And so I get the answer of that line, but I pushed everything else out because I'm waiting for when are we going to get here?
Yep.
So.
Yep. I can't teach using fill in the blank because you have to use specific wordings so they know to fill in the blank, and I'm never specific in my wordings, and I can't remember
No,
to
you
say
don't.
exactly the same thing. So
I don't ever do that.
So
I just roll, and the kids students they figure it out, they know, and they'll engage their neighbor.
all right, so you use fill in the blank notes well. You have notes.
I do very well.
But so there's nothing wrong with the fill in the blank notes. Just realize it engages in a different way.
Mhm.
Some people it works really well with. Some people it doesn't. And so I usually lean more towards the summary outline notes. And you can do a combination of those to some extent. And have have the outline. Like if I had these and I had just every once in a while a blank in each line to fill in, that keeps the fill in the blank people engaged. But then there's also more notes that are there. I just the fill in the blank for me was always not as engaging, so it's less natural for me to come up with them. Yes.
When I used to do the little books, that you had all the fill in the blanks, it was hard for me because I need background.
Mhm.
So it seemed like those blanks always were going just one direction.
Mhm.
And when I study, I hardly ever just go one direction.
Right.
So I felt like I was only learning what she was thinking at that time when
Right.
she wrote the book. So that was hard for me. That's why I don't care for them.
Right.
But I guess if I'm teaching and I have the blanks, they're my blanks, I know
Yeah.
where they're going.
Well, I say it's definitely a personality thing, and I will say that in my experience, there are fewer personalities that engage well with the fill in the blank, but they do, and then there are more that engage with the just writing it out and having like a summary outline. I'm like Kyle as well with the fill in the blank. I'm only listening for the blank, and then I'm not hearing and engaging. Whereas for me, if I sit back and I'm just listening and I'm engaging with what they're saying, then I'm good. And I'll be honest with you, I played solitaire through almost all of my seminary classes or doodled, because otherwise I became second teacher. Otherwise I engaged too much, and it's kind of a strange thing. It was like I would be going so much that I'd want to say this and I want to say this, and I'm a kind of person, especially at that maturity I was at, there was that urge to say something, and so I just got to a point where I would have something to kind of keep me here and be listening, and I'd only engage because I started to dominate classes. Professors had to talk with me, and I'm like, okay, so I'm gonna have to have a way not to do that.
And sometimes you disagree with the blank. Like, I would have went with this word.
Yes.
Why are we doing that word?
In the Greek it says that.
Right.
Yeah. And then you had
Dwayne-
the one just like blank, 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 blank. I'm sorry.
Wayne, one of the things I was gonna say too,
Yes.
with the use of writing, we don't think of this naturally,
Mhm.
but learners, no matter who they are, your brain learns based on at different levels, if you can think about it. So when you're doing a kinesthetic exercise like writing,
Mhm.
that's actually helping your brain because it's doing two activities at once. It's thinking through and you're writing. And so there's two activities. That's part of why I will use a visual, because a visual is a cue and that helps your brain.
Right.
If we had the ability to have smell, that's,
I have
that's
the ability.
another
The class doesn't appreciate it. But the
I haven't showered in a week.
anyway, yeah. So when with using those, using the writing, that's why I said earlier. It's like they're not. It's not that just that the writing allows them to remember it later. The write in the sense that they can go back and read it. The writing sets it in their brain. I do have a little bit of that more. Like if somebody comes and says I want to make an appointment with you, and I sit down and I write that out on a note,
Yep.
I will remember it better than if I don't write it out on the note. So that's definitely there. So last thing here, no graphics are better than bad graphics. So if you're doing PowerPoint, I realize I never got going on PowerPoint, but if you're doing PowerPoint and you put up graphics and they're really cheesy, they're pixelated, they're kind of you don't know how to use it and stuff like that, that actually becomes a distraction. So you're better off using more of a blank slide with just straight up letters and what you're writing than trying to put in graphics that are not actually helpful and can be distracting. That one's more a Dwayne opinion, and because I really like good graphics, but it is something that nowadays the quality and expectation with the graphics is much higher, and so if you put together a slide that's just a square picture and then the text doesn't even fit around it and everything else, it doesn't help. So you're better off going with no graphics and just having more of like a blank slide that's just the content with letters there. And then the last thing I want to just say is, in all of this, these things are things to help us refine our skills as teachers so that we become good communicators. But to get to the last thing here, always remember that teaching and preaching are the beautiful and peculiar work of God. Now, there's beautiful because when He's leading us and we're saying it and we're being articulate, and when you have somebody who knows the language they're speaking in well and uses it well, and God is leading and guiding that, it's an amazing, beautiful exchange of ideas on a spiritual level that's eternal, and it's a real miracle when you think about it. And it's peculiar to God in that God is the one who guides it and works it. You can be as eloquent as possible, but if the content of what you are saying is not the wisdom of God, it's not going to accomplish anything of eternal purpose. It is the work of God alone. We are the hammer in the hand of the carpenter, the chisel in the hand of the master. Trust His hand above all else. So yes, we've talked about these things that you can add to refine and to make what you're saying more beautiful and well constructed, but you don't trust in these things. You trust that His hand, and if these things equip you so you feel so confident you get up to teach and you're not just before God going, I can't do this without you. If you feel in your heart you can do this without Him, you are in a dangerous place. You have to get up and realize these things help in His hands to make things beautiful, but He is the one that has to be doing the work, and you have to trust His hand, not the skills that you have as you teach. And when you do that, He can bring those skills out in beautiful ways, but that's not why the teaching is being successful. The teaching is being successful because the Holy Spirit that's working in you and coming out in your words is working inside the other person. And unless those two are present, in other words, if you have the Holy Spirit and you're speaking to somebody without the Spirit, that person is not going to understand what you taught, no matter how eloquently you teach it. Some of the comments I've had after I preached are like, I'm so glad I came for the sermon because it spoke right to me, and it told me that I can, now I can go out and I should go and have a career in the field that I want, and I should pursue my dreams. I'm going, that's not anything of what I just preached, but they hear what they want to hear. They always will hear what they want to hear. It takes the Holy Spirit inside somebody to help them hear what God wants them to hear. And so you have to trust that in those things and see that moving. And lean on that for your confidence in teaching, not the skills and the things that we've gone through. And these just allow God to refine it. And then the last thing I want to say with that is the people who wrote Scripture to us did this. They wrote with amazing beauty. I think sometimes because we're used to going to Scripture and stuff, and we see it as a certain way, we don't think of it as beautiful literature. But if you go back, especially for the language that it's in and the time that it is and the structures that they are extremely well thought out, structured, pre-planned, using the language beautifully compositions. That's what they are. They are the authors of Scripture often deeply impress me with how skillfully they wrote and put things together. And so that is something where God was working with them, using their skills to bring to us His Word, and He did it skillfully. We should do it skillfully as well. So, all right. Any last questions you guys have?
I got two.
Yes.
Just wondering if you have tips on the reality of, because they're preaching, got a wide spectrum of where people are at in their maturity. So there's a part of me, it's like, well, that's so obvious, basic, but for some people that's new. But for somebody who's mature, it's like, okay, I know that. Yet I can go to the other extreme and a lot of information, a lot of depth, but that can be information overload for that person that doesn't even know some of the foundation. So how do you try to keep that in mind when you're going through there and make sure you are hopefully appealing to people wherever they're at? I mean, other than obviously it's a thing of prayer and the Holy Spirit, I get that. Are there any practical tips that you do when you're prepping?
So there's different opinions on that. I teach to the higher denominator. my thing is this, if those who are mature are continually being fed and growing and challenged, then they are there to unpack it for the others. And if I teach just to the younger, then my mature people are unfed. So there's that. Now, I do have to realize then, however, that as I speak of certain things, I have those in my audience who don't know. So one of the biggest things I do is what I try to do is speak of what I'm talking about and then define it. So I'll use the word that the mature person can understand, the terminology that the mature believer will understand, but then I also can unpack it for the newer believer. The problem with people understanding what we're teaching is not really the vocabulary, though. Some of it is, but a lot of what the problem is that the immature believer isn't interested. They're just not interested in it yet. And so if I bring it down to the level of the less mature believer, how will they ever get interested in it?
Sure.
And then I'm not giving anything that really interests and challenges the mature. So I tend towards the mature, trusting that God, as they start talking to people, like, I didn't get what he said. That was like way over my head when he said this, and someone else is going, yeah, well, I think what he meant was, talk with him. But I have people that will say, that was way over my head, but what I understood, I really, I enjoyed, and then they're challenged to be like, I want to know more. And a big part of that is being able to show and paint the picture for the less mature believer of how exciting it is to know it. So just like, and we had a Star Wars party last night. There's a bunch of people there that, the lady at my table, she never watched Star Wars at all. But as we're going through all this trivia and asking the questions, and people know that, she's like, I don't know any of this. She's like, I should have really started watching this. Because they see the excitement that other people have, they see other people are engaging in it, and then they're like, oh, maybe I want to do that. And I think that can happen as well. So, second question.
Yeah, similar to that is so understanding. I myself am still a work in progress, and I'm still being taught myself. So I understand that sometimes I'm going to be teaching to people that might be more mature than me, and there's this pressure and this. So going back, like say 30 years for you, how do you get comfortable with that? God just using me where I'm at, knowing what I know. It's not excusing my due diligence of digging in the Word, but understanding like if I try to get to become the expert in this passage, I'm actually sometimes not. It's to my own detriment. So how do you get kind of comfortable with your own skin to understand there might be people past you in this material, and you may not be the expert in that sense.
What I would say is to realize the issue is not being, further forward or further back. The issue is the fact that you're all different. So in other words, your life, your experiences, what God has brought you through is part of the gift of teaching you have. So you have a perspective and an insight that somebody who may be 30 years older than you, not that they went to the passage and never understood it, it's they didn't go through your life such that they saw in that passage what you do. And so I'm never worried about, it's not like I got to be further ahead than everybody. I trust that by God's sovereignty, I'm up here teaching, so He is going to give me something that person is going to be fed by, and I just trust that. And even though they may have 30 more years with that passage, I still have a different life that He brought me through, and so I just trust Him. Go with it.
And there are some, Kyle, that we've had in the past, and this was an old Dutchman that used to sit in the class, and it was almost like he was looking, and he would do that with Eugene. He would be looking to try to almost catch him, and he slipped me a note one time because of something that he thought he had heard. He had a hearing aid, so he didn't hear it well, and he wrote down a bunch of verses about this particular issue that I had said in a class, and he said, and I was young and naive, and I went, oh, wow, and that's kind of like the worst case scenario, but I really had to say, you know what, I'm open-handed about it, and God's gonna use my words with who God is gonna use words, and if people are going to choose that path, then they choose that path, and I'll try to explain it, and he and I had a chat, and, but it's
Any other questions? Yes.
This is about being a student, not a teacher. I tend to want to add things to, like our life group study all the time, cause I just get so excited about things.
Right.
And, but I also wanna be a good student in that class. When a question is asked and no one speaks, I try to, I mean, it's like I'm sitting on my hands, I don't want to.
Mhm.
But if I have an answer that I at least want us to discuss, you know, because I'm not sure about something, I think it's so foolish now, well, we're in a group not to say it, but then sometimes I feel I'm over talking everyone
But
else.
So-
after you speak, other people start.
Yeah, that's when other people speak, but
Right.
I always feel like
As long as you
I'm
don't go over.
maybe
When you
pushing
don't.
Right.
my.
What I
goal.
would do, like when I teach the class with the homeschool, I always have one or two students that just automatically answer, and I was that way. That's how I
There you go.
was. So so the advice I usually give them is answer once, wait and let somebody else answer, wait through the silence, make somebody else answer, and then do that once or twice, and then answer again. And you just do that. Yes, other people might start if you ask the question, but if you always go first, then people, they're kind of waiting for that ice to break, and other people need to take that burden to do that. Now, the teacher has the ability, and like what I've done is I've said that to them, and I watch them, like I ask the question, and I'll be really specific, and I'll say, Mackenzie, you answer, and she doesn't, and everyone else is not answering. So finally, I'll be able to go ahead, Philip. You can tell us. I get you because you can see in their eyes they know, and you just say that. But it gives the other people the full opportunity to come in otherwise. So
In this situation, if the question isn't answered, they just go to the next one. No one responds to that question.
that's bad. That's a bad practice
It's
as a
just like,
teacher.
no, let's
Yeah.
talk about this one.
The thing for me as a teacher, if you ask a question, no one answers, and you move on, you didn't mean that question, and that's probably why they're not answering it. If that question isn't central to understanding and helping people understand, don't ask it. And then if you've asked it and no one answers, rephrase it. And that's what I'm saying. The teacher has to carry the burden of the fact that if people are always scared to answer their questions, they're not asking good questions. And so because you're asking questions that they're afraid they don't know. And the reason why people will speak up after you share is because you share and they go like, yes, then, that is what they're talking about. I'm confident that's what they're talking about. Now I'll share what I think about that. But they didn't want to step out and risk being wrong. And so that's where the teacher, right. I don't either. Besides, I'm not wrong. The teacher's wrong at that point. But no, it's just that that's what you have to realize is that other people have to do it, but that is more the fault of the teacher not rephrasing the questions and not asking questions that the students can actually answer. Most of the time, I mean, there are times where you're asking a good question and the students just don't want to, because you're trying to challenge them to be a little bit more personal, and no one wants to be.
So in your eyes, which I probably don't care if I don't agree, but in your eyes, to be a good godly woman and no one's answering, and it's a male leading the class, I'm just to shut up.
No.
I don't know where my role goes.
No. I mean, when you're in a class and you're learning and you ask a question, you just ask the question. There's no idea of this person should just keep their mouth shut. The thing that you need to do is be loving, because these are all practices of loving the Lord your God and loving your neighbor as yourself. If you're the person who knows the answer, instead of loving your neighbors yourself, is realizing they need more time to process. They need more time to think, and I need to stop and not jump in every time. And I need to let them have an opportunity. They need to interact in order to grow. So my loving them is realizing the goal of this class is not to make sure someone can answer the question. The goal of this class is to have everybody answering and growing. Right. And so I don't approach as like, why isn't somebody answering? Because that's not the goal, to just get the answer. The goal is to bring everybody in. And if you don't let that happen, you're not being loving to the people around you. And so it's not a be quiet, don't speak. It's take in who's around you, take in their personalities, and love them and let them grow too.